All right, well, welcome everyone to our panel discussion for this evening. We are really excited to have this discussion, and I'll be honest, this topic is actually what prompted the idea to have these live education webinars for the Regional Foxtrotting Horse Foundation. So we're excited to have everyone here to sort of talk through Western, English, and country pleasure and really discuss how they're different. We have three exceptional exhibitors tonight that have all had great success in these events. And I know that they'll provide a lot of information for everyone. And so I wanted to start with just some introductions. And I'll let you guys introduce yourself, and you can tell me who you are, where you're from. And then I'm interested to know how you got involved with horses in general. So when that started for you. And Bryce, we'll start with you.
Awesome. Thank you. My name, like Amber said, is Bryce Jefferson. I grew up in Utah and currently live in California. My family has always had horses. My dad grew up in a horse family, so therefore I trickled into horses. And being nice but kind of mean brother, my mom would send me with my dad a lot, and so I learned how to ride when I was like 3 or 4 years old. From there, I kind of did a lot of farm things. We hunted a lot with our horses, and then probably when I was 15, I was introduced to the world of showing and foxtrotter specifically. So yeah.
And how did that introduction with foxtrotters start? Did you have foxtrotters before you started showing?
No. So I had grown up on quarter horses and thoroughbreds. So I was a hard trotting king. And Steven Story, who many people know in the breed, he was my introduction to the breed, as he built a large facility in my hometown. And so that kind of fostered a relationship, and then it expanded from there. So.
Great. Well, we appreciate you being here to share your knowledge.
Thank you.
Next, we'll go to Aaron, if you want to do a little introduction and then kind of walk through that same thing, how you got involved in horses.
Hi, I'm Erin Patterson. I live up in Harrisonville, Missouri now. And let's see, I think my mom bought her first foxtrotter when I was 6 or 7. And I started showing at Ava when I was 8. So that's kind of how I got started. And then I started training professionally right when I was in college. So quite a while ago now. And I do both versatility and performance. So, yep.
And you do not just foxtrotters, just so everyone knows, you bring a stock course background as well in showing.
Yeah. So I grew up showing non-gaited and gaited horses, and then I've continued doing that, quite a bit. I don't train as many non-gaited horses as I do foxtrotters, but I have a quarter horse, actually 2 now of my own. And so that's kind of a hobby. And then I have a few people that I help with those too.
Yeah, I think that perspective from those other breeds will really help us with the conversation this evening as well. And so last, but certainly not least, Jennifer, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Jennifer Roberts. I'm from Southwest Missouri, little town called Bradleyville, which is about 20 minutes from Branson, Missouri, really. And our parents always had horses, usually grade foxtrotters originally. And then we got into the show horses whenever I was, 10 or 11 or so, in the performance. And we've always had a farm, so we always had work horses, which were usually foxtrotters. And somehow or another, we ended up with a breeding operation and showing horses, so in the performance mainly. And I'd done some versatility back several years ago. I haven't done it in recent years, but the last about 8 years I've gotten to classical dressage with Arabians and half Arabs, and the last 2 years I've got big into Western dressage. So, and I'm gonna try to start some foxtrotters in Western dressage this year. So instead of the Arabians, well, I still have the Arabians, but
well, that's very, very exciting. So again, I appreciate all three of you being willing to come on and talk about this topic. I think it's one of those things a lot of people ask, right? So there's these pleasure classes. And really what's the difference between them and as far as what a judge is looking for, type of horse, all those things. And so I'm really hoping this conversation helps people be comfortable with these classes and maybe get more involved in them, because we do see them growing throughout the breed. So I thought we'd start with Western dressage or pleasure. So you just had me thinking about dressage. So I thought we'd start on the Western side and then we'll move into English and country pleasure after that. So not to put you too much on the spot, Bryce, but I thought if you could start with just an introduction, say someone's out there and they've never been to a show, to try to explain what Western pleasure is, and then just a little bit about the rules and what someone would have to do to take their horse into a Western pleasure class.
Sure. I have actually been that person before. So I'm going to rewind time in my mind and pretend I'm talking to that person. So Western pleasure is, I guess, in versatility, there are some classes you exhibit alone, and there are some classes you exhibit with all of the other exhibitors in that division. So Western pleasure happens to be one where you go in the class with everyone who's exhibiting in that division. You'll work on the rail, and there are gaits that are called out by the judge that you perform at that time. And then at some point you'll be asked to reverse and head the other direction. And yeah, I think it's important to remember it's Western pleasure. So Western tack, Western attire, looking pleasurable. So when you watch a horse move and go, you want it to be like, oh, that looks so pleasurable. The rider, it looks smooth. The rider has great equitation. So I think in a very bird's eye view of the class, that's kind of what's required.
Okay. So Aaron, Jennifer, Bryce, anyway, just jump in whenever there's something you want to talk about a little bit. So for those people, and I'm sure we have a lot of people that are used to a traditional, a performance class in our breed. The gate calls, at least in the versatility arena for Western pleasure, there's the trail walk versus just the flat walk. So talk to me a little bit about those gates. Like, what is a trail walk versus a flat foot walk in Western pleasure?
I'll keep going, but ladies jump in at any moment because you're super qualified. So a trail walk basically is one gear down from a flat foot walk. In some ways that it does differ is the reins tend to be a little looser than they are in the flat foot walk. The neck does lower a little bit, showing relaxation, showing calmness. And another gear, I guess, or gait would be, not really a gait, but another gear would be you have to halt in the class, showing that your horse can stand still. It's not fidgeting. It's not uncomfortable. And then other times you'll be asked to back. So showing that your horse has some suppleness, and it's a maneuver that some performance horses don't know. So that may be something that if you're transitioning a horse or bringing a horse in, that backing can be different.
Okay. So Jennifer, I know you're a judge, so not to put you on the spot here. So when you look at a Western pleasure class, what are you looking for in a horse?
In a Western pleasure class, I'd like to see them a little bit lower set than in the main ring. In the main ring, sometimes they're a little more up and showy. I want them a little less animated. Head set, just maybe a little bit lower. Little less head shake if possible. And that's not a big deal, because I usually, when I judge, I don't look above the footwork really, if I can. So animation doesn't, you're gonna have some performance horses come back there and they're gonna have animation. So that shouldn't be a deal breaker on a horse, but I would like to see them a little bit more relaxed, a little bit looser rein. And the free walk, dressage talking here. And the trail walk, a loose rein with their head down, usually preferably around weather level, I would like to see. And a nice relaxed, a little more overstride in the walk, if they can, so they're more relaxed, is what I'd like to see. And then in the halt, just a nice quiet halt where they don't move, no fidgeting. And the back, which a lot of the straight performance horses have issues with, is they want to brace, and you don't want to really see that in any of the divisions, really, any of the 3 divisions we'll discuss. You really don't want to see them bracing. Just a nice, relaxed, supple, easy to respond to commands type of.
Okay. Erin, what would you add to that?
Okay, so one more maneuver that they do sometimes ask for in Western Pleasure, especially in the 3-gate Western Pleasure, would be a 360-degree turn on the haunches. So that's something else to make sure that your horse knows prior to competing in that. And that they can tell you which direction to go, whether you move their front end around to the left or to the right, or sometimes they'll leave it up to you, but usually they'll specify, like, back your horse out of the lineup and then do a 360-degree turn on the haunches to the left. And so in that, the horse should keep its left hind foot still and move its shoulder around. Some of them will pivot more on their right hind foot, even if they're going to the left, and that's fine. The important part is that they're keeping their back end fairly stationary and their shoulders are moving around. And then just to touch on like what Jennifer said, as far as movement, like I appreciate that she talked about them not being overly animated. It's not a performance class, so they are not supposed to be judged on having tons of head shake or a big reachy front end. But at the same time, it shouldn't be discriminated against. Some foxtrotters naturally have more animation than others. And like she said, some of them will start in the performance ring and then eventually end up in the versatility arena. So they may have been trained to have a little more animation as well. But as long as the horse is being ridden on a lighter contact and it looks natural, it looks comfortable, because that's something I hear from like non-gated people sometimes, or trail riding people that haven't ridden show horses. And I'm sure, the other two can appreciate this as well, as when they see a horse that has animation or head shake, they're like, that can't be smooth to ride. That can't be comfortable, right? And you're like, no, actually that head shake has nothing to do with what I'm feeling in the saddle, So as long as they're not pushed up on the bit, too extreme to where, you're having to really hold them and that's making it uncomfortable, or that they don't have enough collection in their gait. We want to make sure there's still natural rhythm, but a nice smooth foxtrot. In the rule book, I think when it talks about, what they're supposed to be judging for, it does specify like that they shouldn't have real short, choppy, pitter patter gaits. And that is, a major fault. And again, correctness, like a true square flat foot walk, nice ground covering gaits. If you think about what you would want in a foxtrotter, if you were legit using them like out, working at home in like a Western style, even though it's not a ranch class, if you were thinking about using them like on the farm, or if you're going to go ride down the road, like what you would want their gait to be like. And so you want something that's comfortable, but it is ground covering and correct and easy for them.
So the other gait that, obviously we could talk about the foxtrot, but the lope is something else that I wanted to cover for this particular class, because we see, there are 2-gate Western Pleasure classes, but the main Western Pleasure class is a 3-gate class. I wanted to talk a little bit about a lope. First off, common question for gated horses is, can they lope? So I thought I'd start there, and then what you're looking for in a lope. So Erin, I'll let you start there, and then we'll let the other two jump in on what we're looking for in a lope in a Western Pleasure class.
Okay, so one of the great things about foxtrotters and Western Pleasure is it doesn't have to be excessively slow compared to some other breeds, such as like quarter horses and paints. Like their lope in a Western Pleasure class is very slow. With foxtrotters, I feel like it's a more natural lope, natural speed. Sometimes when a horse is first learning that, when you're training them, they may be faster to actually find a true 3-beat canter. And then over time, you teach them collection and teach them to soften and round up, and then they can learn to do it slower. So you do want it at a controlled speed. It shouldn't be fast. It shouldn't be a gallop around the arena. But it might be even a little faster than some of them up in the performance ring, because it's more of a flat lope and it doesn't have as much elevation to it. And then the other part of that is, again, you're riding one-handed, and it states in the rule book that you should not be pumping the reins, with your hands to do the canter. So they don't, I mean, I'm not speaking from a judge point here, but they're not wanting as much animation to where there's much, rise and dip through the headset, through the head, the neck, and the shoulder of the Foxtrotter. Now, again, as I was talking about head shake, some of them will have more of the natural, what we call the rocking chair canter. I mean, we can watch some of our Foxtrotters go across the pasture and just naturally use their head and neck. And I love that. I mean, so that shouldn't be held against them if there's some natural movement to that. But it's not going to be the pumping and the overly animated as up in the front arena. Some of them do struggle a little more at first, learning to lope. So there's different training techniques, and I don't want to talk too much because I want to let the other two chime in on this too. But for me, like, I will use, like, maybe find somewhere that has deeper sand and canter a lot of smaller circles to help them kind of learn to collect and slow down and square up their canter. And but it's trained in a little different manner than training a show canter.
Okay. Bryce, what would you add about the lope in the Western Pleasure class?
Erin is amazing. So she said a lot of things. I think what also makes the lope or the canter kind of tricky for these horses is that when we ask them to flat foot walk and foxtrot, we're asking them to hold their poll above the withers. And then generally, when you see a horse that canters very beautifully, has nice 3-beat collection, their poll is below the withers. So you're resetting their head in a different place to initiate different muscle use. So like Erin said, a trick is like deeper sand, because that helps them round their back and drive their hindquarters up underneath themselves. Another thing I see, myself included, people struggle with a little bit is lead departures. So when you're doing a canter, a lot of times you're asked to either pick up your canter from a trail walk, which is very slow, or a flat foot walk, which is a little faster, but you still don't have a lot of momentum to your movement. So I would say really honing in on how to get a consistent lead departure so that inside front leg is driving or leading forward first. And I feel like that gives your horse more confidence. And then that also helps you get the most amount of points, I guess, or maybe not points, but judges reward for doing that. So
I picked up on something else that Erin said that I wanted to talk to you about, Jennifer, and that she talked about you riding one-handed. And so that's actually a question I've heard people, can you ride two-handed? Do you have to ride one-handed? What are the requirements there for Western Pleasure?
That depends on the age of the horse a lot of times. Junior horses, which are considered 5 and under, you're allowed to ride two-handed if you have a snaffle bit on them or a bosel. Hackamores are not legal, just bosels. And so you are allowed to ride two-handed with them if you have a snaffle only. When you have a shanked bit on any horse, and especially the older horses, 6 and older, it is one-handed only. And depending on the type of reins you have, even depends on how you can hold the reins. Because if you have Rommel reins, which are 1-piece reins after the holding point, you're only allowed to hold them with pretty much your fist, I guess, technically. And when you have split reins, you are allowed to have 1 finger between the reins. So
there's a lot of nuances to all this.
Yeah.
Obviously there's the rule book out there. Where else can people go to get tips on preparing for Western Pleasure?
So our rule book was basically taken from the quarter horse rule book originally. So a lot of the rules are similar to what you would find in the quarter horses. I mean, they've been changed a little bit over time to accommodate the foxtrotters, but so they're practically the same as what you would find in the quarter horses and also the USEF. I see a lot of similarities in the rules in the USEF Western section compared to ours as well.
So a lot of places don't have Foxtrotter only shows. They have open breed shows. So Jennifer, based on that, it sounds like if you have a Foxtrotter and you go to a open breed show, the rules should be fairly similar.
They should be, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. The way you ride the horse and the tack should be all the same. So
Okay.
across the board.
So Aaron, I know you've done that. I'm sure the other two have too, where you've taken a Foxtrotter to open breed show. Any tips you'd give to someone that wants to practice Western pleasure by going to one of those shows?
One thing I tell my clients when we take Foxtrotters and show against other breeds, especially non-gated breeds, is to make sure that it's very obvious the difference between your gaits. So a lot of times they're just going to ask for a walk and then an optional gait and a canter. And so sometimes I'll say, if your horse has a really fast flat foot walk and a kind of a slower foxtrot, in comparison, maybe slow down your flat foot walk a little bit, just to make sure the judge can really tell that you're doing a difference, a different gait there. And then, other than that, there's really not, you just show your horse for its breed and make it, a good representation for our breed. A lot of judges we've found up here are pretty fair and have, really placed them well, even compared against a lot of different breeds. They're very different in style from the Foxtrotters, but they're not all of them will. There'll be some judges that strongly prefer a quarter horse style or, an Arabian or whatever. Everybody's got their preferences, but as far as preparing, just learn what is expected of Foxtrotters for Foxtrotter shows. But like she said, the rules are pretty much the same unless it's a specific class that's different from Western pleasure, like the ranch classes and things like that. But as far as Western pleasure, you could do a slow walk if you want. They won't ask for a trail walk. So we still usually do a flat foot walk for the walk and then a foxtrot for the trot or optional gait, and then just our regular lope for our canter.
Before we move topics, Bryce or Jennifer, any final tips on Western pleasure?
I would say there's a couple things. So, more based on the attire. So in Western pleasure, it's required that you do not wear blue jeans. So they have to be a jean of like black, tan, something else. Cause I think that if you've never been to a show, blue jeans feel Western, but they're not allowed in the show ring. So that is a disqualification. And it is required that you ride with a cowboy hat, because up front, sometimes when women exhibit their horses, it's not required to wear a cowboy hat. In the versatility arena, doing Western pleasure, it is required, whether it's a cowboy hat or a helmet, just some sort of hat. So yeah, those are a couple little pieces that I think were helpful.
Okay. Jennifer, anything you want to add? All right. Well, think about it.
No, chaps would be optional. You don't have to have chaps. I know a lot of people do show in them, but they're not actually required. So, and then a collared shirt usually, or something with but that depends on the weather too, a lot of times.
Yeah.
So,
Right. So let's switch topics here and talk a little bit about English pleasure. And so Jennifer, I thought I'd start with you and talk a little bit about what is in English pleasure, specifically tack requirements, because I think that's a big question when it comes to English pleasure, and any rules on the gait requirements.
Yeah, the tack is actually a tricky deal in the English because they allow so many different types of tack in the English class, English style. tack anyways. Like, you're allowed to have a flat seat or a cutback saddle. You're allowed a dressage saddle. You're allowed a hunt seat or an all-purpose type saddle. So, but when you show in those types of saddles, you have to also show in the attire for that saddle. Except the English saddle or the dressage saddle where you're allowed to show in saddle seat attire. So, I mean, the rules are kind of a little different there. So, let's see. So here, this is a cutback saddle. It's actually would be considered a park type saddle and not a flat seat, which flat seats are allowed. It's just this part would be straight instead of up. I show in this saddle because it's more comfortable to show in, and then they also allow a dressage saddle. So, which has got a lot more depth to it, which is actually even easier to ride than the park saddle that I just showed. And which for the English pleasure classes in the main ring, I would actually prefer to see these two type of saddles as a judge. I'd prefer to see those two type saddles in the main ring. When you're showing versatility, they also, you're allowed a hunt seat saddle. This is actually an all-purpose saddle, but it's considered a hunter type. I forgot to bring my jump saddle out, but they're also allowed. And but when you show in the hunt seat saddle, you do have to show in the hunt seat attire, and which is a hunter coat with choker or tie. You have to have the English boots, the tall English boots, conservative colors, like navy, dark grays, greens. Pants should be khaki or traditional colors. You do have to wear a hard hat, or with or without, I think, the harness on it, or a hunt cap is also allowed, I believe. Yeah. And the hair should be up, which I don't think a lot of people realize. Your hair has to be neat and up and out. And the rule book actually says the judge can penalize you for not having your hair up in the English classes. And that was a hunt type. When you show dressage type, you can wear either a hunter or a dressage coat, both. Same thing with the high boots. Traditional colors, again, with the conservative dark colors and light colored pants. The saddle seat. You have to wear the saddle seat suit, either a day coat or formal wear. Usually, most people show informal wear, which is they prefer more conservative colors, but you see people shown in any color. So it doesn't with the day coats, and the tack for the bridles, you're allowed just plain English bridles with no glitter, no rhinestones, no sequins. You are allowed to have colors, leather, but not any glitter, rhinestones, nothing that sparkles. Your ribbons, when you show saddle seat, you're allowed to have ribbons. They can't not have rosettes on them or bows. Also, no rhinestones or glitter on the ribbons. When you show dressage or hunt seat, there's no ribbons at all. And the rulebook actually allows you to braid their manes up if you want. Foxtrotters are generally shown with their mane down, so I've never seen anybody show with their mane up. You can, it's optional, but. And then the bits there's a lot of rules on bits. So, let's see. They have to be English style snaffle or English curb bits. And when you show saddle seat, you're allowed a Wonder bit, a Weymouth, a Pelham with either single or double reins, a Kimberwick, or a bridle with full double reins, or other refined bits that are not a maximum length of 1/2 inch. Which there is no rule in here about them being steel or aluminum. So if the bit is under 1/2 inch in width, the shank, you can't have aluminum bit. And so kind of weird rules, but no elevator bits are allowed. What else here? I'm sure there's other things, but
So while you kind of peruse that and make sure we caught everything, I'll go. No, well, I
yeah,
know Aaron has ridden with the double reins, and you typically show. Well, I've seen you do that, so I'll kind of go to you and have you talk a little bit about that and the choice between and the tire and all those things and how you decide what you're gonna do.
Me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So for me, part of it comes down to the style of the horse. So if your horse is a little more animated horse, like Jennifer said, as a judge, like typically she might prefer, at least in the front arena, the dressage saddle or the cutback saddle. I kind of lean towards the saddle seat type as well. I think for our horses that are a little more animated and showy, that style looks really well together. If you have a horse that might not have as much animation, maybe it's a little slower style of horse, carries a little lower headset, has a little less head shake, then that might go well with a hunt seat type, especially in the back arena, in the versatility arena. Because then it kind of differentiates you from the saddle seat horses back there that might be a little more animated. So it might be the right route to go with a less animated horse. But I like the saddle seat look. And so that's the direction we usually go.
So with that, with those styles, it makes it sound like the horse should look a little different depending on what's not only you should look different, but the horse should go a little different. Is that kind of what you're?
Yeah, and I think it even touches on that in the rule book. I think I read it a week or two ago. I reread that just to refresh my memory, but I think it even touches on that, on kind of the style of the horse. If it's a hunt seat attire, that the horse should carry a little lower headset. And in the saddle seat cutback style, a little more elevated headset. So might look a little more towards the performance style. But again, they're judging different than performance. It's not a regular performance class. And then it probably depends a little on if you're showing it in the front arena, under a group of more performance judges, or if you're in the back arena showing in the middle of all the versatility classes. A lot of performance horses will cross over and do English in the front arena that don't come to the back arena. So that makes a difference too. We tend to take ours to both. If we have one that's showing in it, a lot of times we'll show them in both the front and the back arena.
So Bryce, talk to me a little bit about gait requirements in the English pleasure class. What are you asked to do?
So in a lot of ways, English pleasure is kind of like a sistered mirror to Western pleasure. You've just kind of changed the tack, but you will go in, you will walk, trot, canter, reverse. They have you back up at the end, or sometimes on the rail, depending on like the judge. A nice thing that maybe if someone's less confident riding with one hand, English pleasure is a nice class because regardless of the age of your horse, you ride with both hands. So if you had a horse you've been prepping for a show and you were comfortable riding English, but you felt like one hand was a little bit tricky for you, English pleasure could be a nice introduction to be able to ride double-handed, and maintain maybe the feeling of a little bit more control. And I will, I guess, validate Aaron's comment as well. Yes, the rule book does touch on the fact that you can have a slightly more animated or exaggerated horse in a saddle seat attire and saddle, as well as being able to have them slightly more collected, which my interpretation of that is you can have a little bit more pressure in their mouth. So yeah, so I would say they're very similar to each other, Western pleasure and English pleasure.
So I was going to ask that question because me watching classes, and you guys are the experts, it seems like a Western pleasure class, everything is a little bit slower, if that makes sense. So everything looks a little more relaxed, where in English, and you watch English pleasure, it does look like their heads come up a little, maybe more, a little bit more pressure in the mouth. Maybe they go a little, at least to me, they go a little faster. Maybe it's just the attire makes them look speedier. So is that correct? Am I looking at that correct? Or, should a foxtrot in a Western pleasure class be exactly the same as a foxtrot in an English pleasure class? And Aaron, I'll let you tackle that one.
Okay. So no, I think you're exactly right on that. Typically in Western pleasure, like if you read the rule book again, I keep going back to the rule book, but that is such an important thing for people to read, because like whether they've shown in it, for years, or if they are going to show in it for the first time, like not just the straight out rules, but you can really read about what they're looking for and what the judges are supposed to be looking for, what we are aiming for with the style of our horse. So in the Western pleasure, they go back to it like multiple times, talking about wanting to see a relaxed horse with a calm demeanor, like patience, manners. They touch on manners in all three, I think, Western pleasure, English pleasure, and then country pleasure that we're going to get into. But in Western pleasure, they really emphasize like quiet and calm natured, where in English, they still say well-mannered, but they do talk about it being a little more forward horse, like a little more speed to the gait, because in English you are like you're trying to get somewhere a little faster than what Western is designed for.
So Jennifer, I think you actually have some example of bits, and I was going to see if you'd show those to us, simply because that's the biggest challenge, right? Tack challenge, right? Is bits and English.
I mean, I forgot and left half of them up at the Arabian barn, so I don't have all my, like the Pelham and the Kimberwick. I don't have those, but like this would be a refined shanked bit that they talk about, with only a 1/2 inch width in shank. It's a longer shank than what I usually like to show in, but it all depends on the horse on what type of bit they like too. And then this is a gag bit, a regular gag bit, which you would see where the shank rotates a little bit here on the mouthpiece, the smaller shank. And then these are the Weymouths. This is a double reined Weymouth, and this is just a single reined Weymouth. And like I said, I forgot my Kimberwick and Pelham because they were at the Arabian barn, but so this is just a few of them that are allowed. An elevation bit is similar to a Wonder bit, and sort of, because it does have the rings where the mouthpiece is, but it'll have separate rings down below, and that is an illegal bit. And people tend to get it confused with a gag bit a lot of times, and I've seen it before in the arenas, and it is not a legal bit. But and the rein should always be at the bottom. That's another deal. They should always be at the bottom on a bit like that.
So Jennifer, in the rule book, there's an English pleasure class that's listed up with the performance classes, and then there's English pleasure and the versatility. But if I remember correctly, tack is the same requirements in both sets, right?
Yeah, the tack is the same in both divisions of the. Yeah, the tack would be the same in both. But the bits and the bridles and saddles would all be the same. The attire would be the same in both arenas.
Okay. So Bryce, what's the big difference? So why, we have versatility English pleasure, and then we have, and everyone talks about the main arena. If you're listening, you don't know what that is. So we have a performance arena. So we have English pleasure that occurs in performance. What's the difference?
So I guess the difference that I will note between the two is, like Aaron said, the horses are more forward moving. Some of them can have more animation based on them being in saddle seat. But up front, they'll never have you trail walk your horse. So you're always going to go in there. You'll always exhibit at a walk and a trot. And up front, they also don't ask you to canter in English pleasure. So I would say the English pleasure versatility class is more versatile. So you're showing a more dynamic range of movement from the horse. So all the way from a trail walk to a canter. Whereas up front, I would say it's compared to like the bright lights in the big city. I would say even, I mean, maybe I'm wrong on this, but I would say even more forward moving, a little more animated, a little more flashy. Yeah, to kind of, it leaves a little bit more of like the complete pleasure vibe and goes a little bit more to a showy vibe.
So Aaron, I saw you shaking your head. Is that, you agree with that?
Yeah, no, I agree with him completely on that. I think of it kind of, it is an English pleasure class, but it's not a class that's going towards an overall versatility horse. And it is a different group of judges. You know, the judges, now some of our judges judge both versatility and performance. So they might be a little more aware of what they're looking for in the versatility English pleasure class in the versatility arena. But I do feel like Bryce said, it's up in the performance arena. So it's kind of what I would call a crossover class between versatility and performance. So it's kind of a mix of both. They are looking for quality of gait. They're looking for stride. Some animation will come into play just as far as it being a showy horse. So it doesn't have to have as much animation as like a regular performance class, but it's kind of a crossover to me.
So do you back? So we talked about backing the versatility. Do you back in performance?
Well, you do back in
They
the
should.
English, to gay and in country pleasure, yes,
Okay.
but not in regular performance.
All right. So you're supposed to do that. Okay. Before we switch to country pleasure, any final tips? What would you tell someone starting English pleasure for the first time? Start with you, Jennifer, and we'll go around the horn with this.
Well, practice at home first, because I've found out a lot of horses for some reason don't like an English saddle. So I mean, like half of our, mainly my horses, sisters' horses, we can't put an English saddle on. They're just a little finicky. For some reason, they don't like it. I don't know why. So don't wait until you get to the show to decide to just show English and throw the saddle on. Because I've seen people do that before and it's not always the best thing.
All right.
And then find a saddle that fits you and the horse. I mean, because English saddles, they fit different than Western saddles. And so you can put the same Western saddle on 5 horses and it may fit fine, but English saddle tends to fit just like one type of horse. They're harder to fit to the horse. So
That's interesting. Bryce, what tips would you give?
I agree a lot with what's been said. Practice at home. It is definitely a different feel. Your legs are in a slightly different position in an English saddle. So even for you as the rider, there are a few adjustments that you have to make to sit comfortably and have good equitation. A simple thing I would just throw out there is your number is going to need to be on your back. So a lot of people have their numbers on their show pads for the classes previous to that one. So if you were like, oh my gosh, I didn't know how to change my number, that can feel hectic for you, which I feel like your energy going into a class has a huge effect on how you do. And so just know that your number is going to have to be on your back.
That's a great tip. And how about you, Erin? Tips for English?
So as we already talked about, the bits are different. And so like they said, practice, as he said, for how it feels for you, as she said, the saddle, and then with the bits and experiment with some different bits, because the English bits can feel a lot different to them, especially if it's a horse that, let's say you've shown performance and it's always worn an aluminum curb bit mainly for performance, and now you're going to a steel bit. Some of the steel English bits can have a lot more weight to them, so they're going to feel different in their mouth. And then some of them, like a couple of the examples that Jennifer showed even, are a pretty straight shank. So You might
Yeah.
have to put your curb chain quite a bit looser so it doesn't, have a quite a bit looser, so it doesn't have as severe of a touch to it when you put a little light pressure on your reins. And then spurs. So English, we do not use roweled spurs. It's illegal. And so if your horse is the type of horse that is a push style, meaning we have to drive them forward with our legs quite a bit, and you're used to showing with roweled spurs, make sure you practice with some short English spurs, because your horse will have to learn to go forward off of that. And that can feel different and take a little more encouragement from you.
That's a great tack tip too, because that's another thing that I know a lot of show management ends up having to deal with is spurs.
Yeah.
So definitely ask around on the tack for English too before you get there, so that you can make sure you're prepared for that.
Well, and
have
also
one-
in the English class, you are allowed to ride with a crop if you do need a little extra. If your spurs aren't enough, you are allowed to ride with a whip.
Alright.
So only in the English classes, but
Bryce, were you gonna add something there?
Yes, it's a small thing, but I think sometimes it does have a little bit of an effect. If you're going to show saddle seat and you're very versatility focused, meaning that you don't have a horsey shown performance, you will have saddle seat ribbons tied into your horse's hair. So if your horse is not used to going around with something kind of flicking around just behind or along its neck, that can be something that is helpful to introduce to them long before you arrive at the show. And there's a lot of other stimulation for the horse. So practice just tying something into their hair that just bounces around a little bit. The ribbons are more minimal and different than a performance ribbon, but it is still something that can be kind of distracting. And if they're constantly swishing their head because they're not used to it, that can be a little bit upsetting for you as a exhibitor to have to deal with during your class.
Perfect. So lastly, but not least on this topic either, I want to go to what I think is one of the most misunderstood classes or most confusing classes in this whole pleasure thing, and that's country pleasure. And that's simply because there's a lot of options here, right? So what tack you can use, there's a lot of different things that can go into country pleasure. So Erin, we'll start with you. You want to give me a little, what is country pleasure? So answer that question for everyone.
Okay, so country pleasure is a class that's shown, a 2-gate class up in the performance arena. Again, it's just another pleasure class. So still kind of looking for similar things of what we're looking for a Western pleasure horse or an English pleasure horse. Manners, quiet disposition, a horse that looks like it's a pleasure to ride, a horse that you would want to go ride down the road for 3 hours, that it looks comfortable, does not necessarily have to be overly animated, but it can have some animation. So in country pleasure, as you said, you have the option of showing English or Western. And the rule book does make sure to mention that it can't be a combination of both. So English saddle, like it says, does not go with a Western bridle. So you have to pick a style, and that is kind of across the board. We see that sometimes that someone new into it might have some mismatching tack. So make sure that your English tack is English, even from hunt seat to saddle seat, you can use a plain brown or whatever color leather bridle for either, but typically in hunt seat you're going to use just plain leather, like not so much colored brow bands and cavesons, where in saddle seat a lot of times we'll get the ribbons in the brow band and caveson nose band to match the color of the jacket or vest or something that you're wearing under the jacket, just to add a little more style to it, where everything's a little more conservative in the hunt seat style. And so if you go with the Western route for country pleasure, then you're following all the rules for tack and attire as listed under Western pleasure. And then same for English. So if you're going to show in a saddle seat, you can follow the rules for the saddle seat attire and tack, or dressage or hunt seat. You usually see mainly we've only been doing it for a couple of years, but mainly saddle seat style or Western up in there. And so again, I kind of say go with the style of the horse. So the last year, I think we had a lot more English horses in there than we had Western. from what I remember, but you know, there were some of both. So it kind of depends on where you feel like your horse excels the best. It looks, if it's a little more showy and a little more animated, then you might go with more of the saddle seat style. And also with that, like, does your horse neck rein well? You know, can you show it if it's a senior horse? You need to show it one-handed in a shank bit. If it's a junior horse, you could still, same as the Western Pleasure rules apply. 3, 4, 5-year-olds can show in a snaffle bit two-handed. So that can help determine which route you go.
So I think it would be a very difficult class to judge, right? Because you have these different things. So I don't know who wants to tackle that question of how do you go about judging a class where horses should go based upon the tack that they're in. So if you're in Western tack, right, you should be judged on a Western Pleasure horse, where if you're in English tack, you should be judged like an English horse.
When I judge those type of classes, I try to just judge the horse that best represents its discipline. So, I mean, if there's a horse out there in hunt seat that's got the best gaits of everything out there, but it's not showing to the best of its division, really, I would put Western Pleasure horse over it. If the Western Pleasure horse is showing to the best of its, a Western Pleasure type horse would be. I mean, that sounds weird, but so, but I mean, when I judge, I try to base it on the horse that best represents its discipline. So it could be a Western Pleasure horse could easily beat out a English horse just because it best represents its division. And that's how it should be. And it's, I think, how they should always be judged like that. Just whatever horse best represents its division that it's showing.
Erin, I saw you nodding a little bit with that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think she kind of confirmed what I was saying as far as like from her side as a judge and my side as a coach or trainer or exhibitor, that again, going with the style of the horse. So if we have a horse and we've had a couple of these that are a little more versatility style, but want to go show in a class in the front arena, the main arena up in performance, Country Pleasure is a great like class to kind of give you something to show in up there on a horse that isn't super animated. And if we have a horse that's, you know, doesn't have tons of head shake or super fast gaits, then we would probably go more of the Western route. If it's a nice, you know, very well-mannered horse and that can ride on a nice light rein and looks like a pleasure to ride and really represents a Western Pleasure style foxtrotter really well, that's the direction you want to go. If you have same as she was saying, if you have a horse that's got quite a bit of animation and maybe rides a little with a little more pressure in the bridle, you know, needs a little more collection, you wouldn't want to show that one even Western Pleasure, but especially hunt seat if it's a higher headset type of horse, because that doesn't go with that style. That horse probably needs to go saddle seat and it will represent that style a lot better.
So Bryce, a question I hear all the time, we've talked about all three of these different pleasure classes. How is pleasure different from performance, and how do you use those based upon the skills your horse has?
Great question. That is a wonderful question. I'm going to share my opinion on that. So I feel like the way that pleasure varies from performance, I think they both have their place. But I think this is kind of encompassing everyone's comments. So pleasure horses tend to be like easier to ride, less contact. And I feel like because you have less contact in their mouth, there tends to be less animation or less head shake. Still correct. I think all of these horses move on the pillars of the breed as far as like they flat foot walk, they foxtrot, they've got reach, they have rhythm. But maybe an analogy that I would say is like one of them, like the pleasure horse is a stroll down the city streets, and a performance horse, I would say, is a model down the runway. It's a little more glamorous, it's a little bit more energy, it's a little bit more spice. So I think just depending on the amount of reach your horse has, the amount of natural rhythm and head shake your horse wants to exude, that kind of slowly starts to help you figure out which direction to go with your horse.
So Aaron, one thing, and I think we've had this discussion before, that makes me excited about seeing these pleasure classes grow, is a little bit what Bryce said there is, sometimes you raise a horse and it's just not meant to be, it's just where it's going. It's not going to be a performance horse, but it's still a super nice, flashy horse. And from your perspective on the trainer side, is that where you really see these classes fitting in, or, what's your perspective on all of that?
Okay, so I'm going to say yes and no. Yes, it's a great outlet for a different direction for a horse that has a great mind, some athletic ability, but maybe isn't as animated or doesn't have as big a stride, or, just isn't as much of the performance style. However, I will say, it still takes a very special horse to make a great versatility horse. So, not every horse that doesn't have quite the gaits for performance can still excel at versatility. But luckily this breed does tend to have a great mind, and they're very trainable and very adaptable. So most of them can go, it's just finding what direction is best for that horse, just like Bryce said. For me, a great versatility horse is a horse that has a good work ethic, has a lot of focus, wants to please, wants to learn, that stays interested. Some horses that can get kind of bored just going in circles too much and can, even as a performance horse, sometimes we'll dabble in some versatility stuff, even if we don't intend on that being their full career, because it gives them something different to think about and refocuses them on something and makes them interested in their training again. Same as like just taking them out of the arena and going right down the road. Sometimes they need a little change. So yeah, it still takes a very special horse to excel and be one of the best, but you can find what direction is best for your horse. They need to be patient and calm because they have to learn to work slowly through trail obstacles. If you're going to do, the full range of versatility, they have to be able to go out and run a barrel pattern and pull pattern, but then slow down and do, trail obstacle where they're backing through these tiny little back throughs and side passing, and then do horsemanship where they might have to lope from a stop and do a lead change, a lot of different maneuvers there too. So these horses are very, very trained when you actually decide to go in all of it. I usually say start with just a couple classes and then add to it and keep adding until your horse is ready, to go for the overall.
So Jennifer, I'm going to let you have the last word here on just why you are a fan of the pleasure classes.
Generally because most of the Foxsters have a really good mind and they're easy to do other things with, and I like them because they're it's a little bit more laid back a little bit, I think. And it's not as hard on them. You don't have to push them as much, I think is why I like it so well. The horses can be more relaxed. It's just a funner class to show in. Now I hate the saddle seat attire because it's always 100 degrees when we show, and so you're sweating buckets, but
you look so nice.
Yes, it looks nice, but the Western is better because you have less, you're wearing less, so you don't have four layers of clothes on, so but it's just a funner class, I think. And then the tack, I like to play with the different tacks and stuff on the horses and learning to ride different styles. So
Bryce or Aaron, any final words before we close out for this evening?
I'll kind of share something that Aaron sparked in my mind. It's just kind of a reminder. When say you decide on a horse and you're like, I'm going to take it versatility, I'm going to do all these things, be patient. You're teaching these horses so many maneuvers and so many requirements of some of these classes that, my opinion and my experience of showing and training versatility horses, is that depending on the horse's personality, it can take 2 to 3, sometimes 4 or 5 years before they're a really efficient versatility horse, where it's like they know what their job is, they understand it, and there's low stress to their environment. So if you take your horse to a show and you're like, I'm going to show it in Western Pleasure and English Pleasure, just know that it may not be perfect the first year. And it's going to take some slow block by block building up their confidence and their understanding of what you're asking. So I think that's also what makes pleasure classes and versatility as a whole so exciting, is it's a slow progressing learning experience for your horse as well as yourself. So like Aaron said, it's engaging. It's a little bit more than going in a circle, which I love performance classes. So I'm not saying I don't love that, but I just think it's a little more engaging in a new, different way for you and the horse. So in that engagement, though, there is some challenge. So just be patient with the process.
Anything you want to add before I close out, Aaron?
Oh, not really. The only other thing I kind of thought of was just, I think you and I have talked about this before, like what a great thing I think the country pleasure class is, as far as for people that maybe don't ever make it to the celebration, like that maybe watch from across the country, haven't actually got to come there yet. I think it's a great thing to show our breed, what they can do. They can do so many different things, not just the versatility, not just the performance, but even up in the front arena, showing the different styles together is kind of neat too. The Western horses versus the English horses, there might be some hunt seat in there, like being able to see them all at once and seeing the different styles and seeing, all of it thrown together.
Yeah. Well, anyone out there that is interested in any of these classes, these 3 people that are on the screen right now are great resources to you. I don't think I've ever asked any of them a question that they haven't been willing to help me with. So I certainly encourage you to reach out to them. A lot of people that listen are in the Kansas City area, so it's great to have Erin close by. So I certainly encourage you to reach out to her. Utah or California, are you bouncing back and forth a little bit, Bryce? Or are you training full-time in California?
Full-time in California right now.
Okay.
So
find Bryce if you have questions. Yeah, if you have questions, find Bryce as well. I mean, he's a great resource out there. And then of course, Jennifer, at some point we need to do a Western dressage one of these, because I think that's another really cool aspect for our breed. So again, kind of reach out to Jennifer, but I'd love to see these classes just continue to grow. So it's so exciting to me to watch them continue to get more and more popular over the years. I think it's a great avenue to showcase our breed. So again, thank you guys so much for coming on and doing this. I know you probably have sent you messages and you're like, I'm doing what? I have to get on Zoom, but here we are. So again, thank you all for that. We're listening, and we will say good night for this evening.
Thank you.